Every VC firm is built a bit different, and today I want to focus on one that is looking to pair institutional investments with specifically targeted companies. And best of all, they are based here in Chicago, which I love. Hey everybody, this is Chris Brandt here with another FUTR podcast. Today I have with us Kaitlyn Doyle, Vice President of TechNexus. TechNexus has a unique approach to the market, directly aligning investors to companies that are valuable to their business. So let's talk with Kaitlyn about what they look for and how their model works, and hopefully we can learn a little bit about what it takes to start up a VC firm. Welcome, Kaitlyn.
Thanks, Chris. I'm happy to be here and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited about this because I just think, the way you're approaching this space is interesting because I think it's fairly novel for, what I've seen in the VC space. And subsequently, some of the companies that you have in your portfolio, to me, are very cool. I mean, you obviously have a lot of, podcast centric kind of things, all the way from audio to the hosting and networks and things like that. But you have a lot of other stuff in there too, which is also very cool. So why don't we start with, what is TechNexus and sort of what's the founder story there and how you found your niche?
What is TechNexus now versus what it was when it started is a very different story, as I think is true of a lot of businesses. TechNexus originally started about 15 years ago in Chicago. And when it first started, it was truly a co-working space. One of the first. It was before the WeWorks of the world, before 1871 in Chicago. But our two founders were entrepreneurs, and they wanted to basically have a clubhouse where they could work side by side with other entrepreneurs, learn from them, learn from things that went well, that didn't go so well, commiserate on the entrepreneur experience, as we all know, can be a roller coaster. So they started just that. They started a clubhouse, and kind of TechNexus was the home base. Over the years, it evolved. They realized as they built this ecosystem of entrepreneurs and startups that a lot of people were interested in that. And one of the types of people that were interested in that is corporations. And so our two founders, were getting a lot of interest from big companies of, hey, what's this innovation going on here? How can we work with these early stage companies that are in your space? How do we, train our teams to think like that and to work like that? So over the years, and I'm flashing forward quite a bit, we evolved into what we are now, which is actually a venture capital firm. And we're a venture capital firm that takes on corporations as our limited partners. We partner with those corporations and help them devise investment theses. And then we ultimately form bespoke, we call them joint ventures, with those corporations to invest in early stage companies that are devising products, technologies, new ways of doing business that are relevant to the corporate business and the way that they are continuing to grow. So our hope is that by partnering these startups and corporations, we can have mutual benefit and they can work together after the investment such that, everybody wins.
You guys are kind of coming in as a venture arm of a company, sort of an outsourced venture arm of a company, which is cool because I think I just want to sort of like hone in on that distinction that you guys are creating. The fund is the corporation that is investing. It's not like there's a fund with 50, 100 people in it or 100 limited partners in it. It's that company. So it's like a kind of custom built venture fund for that company to pursue technologies that align with their interests.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We almost say, like, instead of having one fund, we have 7 different funds that all have unique investment theses, that all have, the unique LP, in every case, one LP. And our corporates really love that because they get a bespoke, tailored portfolio that's very actionable. And they get to be involved in the process, right? Like, they're giving us feedback on a very regular basis about their strategic initiatives, how they're changing, how they're shifting, how they could or couldn't work with some of these portfolio companies. So it's very much a partnership. Whereas more traditional funds are kind of, an LP relationship. They'll take your money and then, hopefully you hear back from them in a couple of years with a check. But this is very much an ongoing partnership, ongoing relationship.
Necessarily with that sort of, relationship and that sort of focus, you're dealing with early stage companies, right?
We are, yes. Our typical entry point for investment is seed or Series A. So what does that mean? It's normally companies that have a product, they're ready to go. They're probably early commercializing. So maybe they have some initial sales, initial revenue, but they're at the point where they really want to scale. A corporate customer could be a game changer to their business. That could literally be the hockey stick that sends them up and to the right, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So they're really trying to get some of that credibility, some of that validation, some of that repeatability when it comes to go to market.
In there is a little bit of an assumed exit as well, too, because if that company does well, they may, be bought by the company that's, funding them, right?
That doesn't happen as often as you would think. It's
Really?
A common question of is acquisition the end goal? And in some cases, it's definitely an option. And I think that optionality is really valuable for both sides of the table, the corporate and the startup. But we also, at this early stage, at Series A or seed, we don't want to limit the startup's growth potential. And if they already met their acquirer at seed, we don't want to have that be the only option. We want the startups to be able to grow and have that financial return potential. So it doesn't happen as often as you would think, although it's certainly an option
That's
that we've
interesting.
considered and that we pursued. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I could see that, from a company's, a corporation's perspective, at least if the ecosystem that they needed gets built, it doesn't matter necessarily whether they own it or buy from it. It's, it's something they needed and they got it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's benefiting the industry, if it's, improving their supply chain or improving the end technology that they're using, they can accomplish their goals with sometimes a much smaller check than having to acquire an entire company.
What do your limited partners look like? Your LPs are, what does that look like, and where do you get them from?
It's a big sales process, and it's a long sales process, right? We're talking to these corporates and building out relationships, building out credibility, and kind of helping assess the desire internally that they have to invest in innovation. What they look like, they are large corporations that have, multi-billion dollars of revenue, and they certainly have free cash flow that's available to invest. Several of them are public companies. A couple of them are private, but they all have in common that they are aware that their industries are innovating and changing. And there's some amount of fear, right? There's some amount of fear that if they're not innovating and they're not consistently changing and investing in those technologies, that they're going to be left behind. In many cases, and actually all of the cases, they are the leaders in their industry, but they see innovation coming up on their heels, and they see some early stage startups that are threatening their customer base or some big problems in their industry or their workflow, or their supply chain, as I already mentioned, that could have the ability to discredit their business. So they're forward thinkers, certainly. And in all of these situations, it's really important that there's executive and board support, right? In most situations, our partnership with these corporations is not going to be successful unless the folks at the very top of the company are supporting it and are behind the vision here.
A lot of the VCs have, the platform groups, which are designed to sort of supply the company they're investing in with talent and resources and things like that, right? But you kind of have another piece of that, which is where you're really sitting down with the LP and advising them of how to build a strategy for themselves, right? So that's a little bit of a different relationship than a traditional VC. I mean, outside of a VC holding a couple workshops here and there, I would imagine, but really getting in and digging into the LP business is a unique piece, I would imagine.
It is, and it's really fascinating because we always tell our corporate partners we're never going to know their business better than they do. So they are an integral part of this. We need to know their business units. We need to know the technology. We need to understand how things work, how things flow, sometimes the inner politics. And they can bring that knowledge and they can kind of advise on the types of technologies that we're looking at. Where TechNexus comes in and where we can be really valuable is we know the venture landscape and we know early stage startups. We know the common hiccups that corporations have when they work with early stage startups and when they invest in early stage startups. So we can get ahead of some of those. And the other benefit that we have from being a third party and not being in the corporate is that we can kind of help push some of that collaboration along. Every time we invest in a company, we have what we call a collaboration thesis, which is why should company X invest in startup Y? What is the way that they can work together? Is it a proof of concept? Is it a technology co-development? Is it a path to acquisition? And then post-investment, we have an entire team in-house at TechNexus that kind of looks at that thesis and says, okay, you said you were going to have a proof of concept with this company within the first 6 months. What's the first step? Let's go do that. So corporates really like that because rather than just saying you're going to collaborate with startups, TechNexus is a way to actually make that happen and see pretty near-term results.
Are you still providing that sort of incubator space that you kind of started off with as well? Or is that model kind of left the picture?
We still do have an incubator space. We call it Teamworking by TechNexus. It's in the Civic Opera building. We have the entire 12th floor there. So a lot of companies work out of there. Several of our portfolio companies work out of there. And like you mentioned, we do have a platform team. We call it our venture impact team that is very active with our portfolio, helping them hire, helping them fundraise, helping them think about what problems they're facing and how to scale those. So we're very active with our portfolio companies. And that's been a very fun and rewarding part of the job as well.
And it's very bespoke in some regards, right? Because the kinds of connections and the things that you have to do. It's an interesting model, and the Civic Opera House is a beautiful place to do it too. That's got to be a great view.
If anybody is in Chicago, we have several happy hours in the summer because we have a 15th floor rooftop. So that's a good spot to hang out and work from in the summer, definitely.
I have to find out about that. I got to get myself to one of those. That sounds amazing.
We'll get you on the invite list.
Perfect. I love it. I love those kinds of things. Obviously, it sounds like where you start when you're doing this is with the LP. And I guess, every VC kind of does that, right? They've got to collect money for the fund and then find the investments, right? But so what do you look for when you're going out to find companies? What do you look for?
Mm-hmm.
Not companies that you're investing in, but companies you're getting to be LPs.
Yeah, our investors, our partners. Yeah. We look pretty broadly. We're looking at companies that have expressed an interest in innovation, that have the balance sheet to support this, have a little bit of free cash flow, as I mentioned, to be able to spend on this. But they're typically in industries that are getting disrupted. If I look at our core industries that we have partners in, a lot of them are industrial. A lot of them are old school technologies, hardware. They're companies that are getting super competitive and margins are getting thinner and thinner. So they're feeling the pressure to continue to innovate. And most importantly, they have either public claims or public support, maybe in their earnings calls, maybe in, CEO or C-suite lectures or talks about how they need to further invest in innovation. So we'll normally have an intro call with, a lot of times our intro contact is the head of corporate development or M&A. We'll have a conversation with them and understand what are they doing now about investing in early stage companies or partnering with early stage companies. Right. What are they hoping to accomplish? Where's that gap? What support do they have? How could they see some of their business units partnering or working with early stage companies? What concerns would they have? And we can normally tell pretty quickly what types of companies are in this to really make change happen and really actually make meaningful impact. One of my general partners always says, and I want to get the quote right, he's like, there's a lot of sizzle, but there's no steak, right? Are you there to do the innovation showcase and essentially host a demo day and, appear to be innovative, kind of that virtue signaling? Yep. Or are you willing to put in the hard work and actually put your money where your mouth is, work with these companies, devote resources to invest in that innovation and to work with them? Because anybody can do the sizzle aspect, but you're not actually getting value out of that, right? You're not going to get meaningful impact by just having, 50 startups come to your office one day a year. It's how do you follow up on that and how do you actually make things move after that?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen the sizzle side of that a lot.
Yeah.
But I got to imagine for a company, for some of these corporations like the types you're talking about, they a lot of times it's so hard for them to get past their internal culture to actually innovate and build anything. Like going out and doing this, I can see as being really healthy for them. That maybe if they do roll it back up inside, that it's something that they could, learn business process from, and just sort of that spark of innovation and things like that. So I could see how that could be really beneficial to some older school companies.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes honestly, even just by being around some of these startups, like the innovation rubs off, right? Like you're reevaluating how the corporation is doing things. We often hear, "Oh, we've always done things that way," or "We do it because that's how my boss did it."
Yep.
And I think being surrounded by innovative and creative and strategic people that are hustling at early stage startups, it encourages employees to kind of think about, like, are there ways I can kind of be innovative and entrepreneurial in my day job, right? Like, are there other things that I can kind of do to push this business forward? So I think it's definitely a contagion, and can definitely be beneficial for culture.
Be careful when
well.
you say contagion these days.
I know, right? We still have PTSD.
Now you've got, your investor cited up, and they say, here's the kind of thing we're looking to, grow our business in, or like, here's where we see a hole in our vision. So, like, how do you go out and source those companies to invest in now?
Great question. Kind of the secret sauce, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, they normally have an investment thesis that they come to us with.
Okay.
They're an audio company and they want to be investing in microphones and speakers, or battery technology to extend the life of the hardware. And we'll come to them. We'll understand what they have thinking, and then our goal is also to try and branch it out a little bit. Okay, great. You've thought about, the hardware components, certainly want to be looking in that area. Have you thought about software, or have you thought about your supply chain, or two steps behind, or how to sell to your customer? So we try and branch that out a little bit and really kind of push the corporate on, what's core, of course, but what's frontier, and what are the things that are coming 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road that you want to get ahead of, and that you want to have kind of your pulse on, to make sure that you're advantaged in that stage.
Right.
So once we have the broad investment thesis identified, we have an entire team at TechNexus. There's about 15 of us on the ventures side that is focused on this day in and day out. So my team of analysts, we have 3 of them currently. They're spending the vast majority of their days sourcing. They're scraping Google, they're scraping PitchBook. One of my analysts is kind of a Twitter nerd, and he's all over Twitter. The things he finds on Twitter, I don't even know how much time he spends on it, but it's fascinating the way he's like, I think this guy's starting a company. I'm like, okay, cool. So he's on Twitter all the time. They're doing demo days. They're looking at incubators, accelerators, building relationships with other co-investors that might be looking at similar stage deals, where they can pull us in, or we can send them deals. So it's literally a little bit of everything, anyway, and every way that we can think of to, get in touch with startups. And then we're reaching out, anything that might be interesting, might be relevant to the investment theme. We're having calls with those folks and kind of getting a sense of what's going on under the hood, what stage the company's at, what they're looking for from a fundraising perspective, how they could theoretically work with our corporate partner, and trying to move that forward. So it's a ton of work. It's something that we all really love doing, in terms of like scouting out deals and trying to find the next big thing, and something that's going to make our corporate partners really excited to continue to work with TechNexus.
If somebody, had a company and, they wanted to get your attention, like what would be the way to do that?
Straightforward. I respond to cold emails. I respond to cold DMs. So
be careful what you say.
I know, right? But if anybody shoots me a note, it's just Kaitlyn@technexus.com. I will take a look, and I'll have, if not myself, I'll have somebody on our team take a look at a deck and understand if there's something strategic. Now, what's going to attract our attention in terms of in that email or in that deck? We want to have a sense of, first and foremost, because of our model, how is this strategic and how is this relevant to one of our corporate partners, right? Like, that's got to be table stakes in order for us to move forward. Because even if it's the best financial investment opportunity, we need to understand how it's going to facilitate something strategic for our corporate partners.
Right,
So that's
right.
our first lens of like, is there something here in one of the thesis areas that one of our corporate partners is interested in? And then from there, we want to see like, we have a pretty good sense of the market in these spaces because we're looking at companies constantly. So
Yeah.
is it innovative? Is it something that, we haven't seen before? Or if we have seen similar technologies, is it different than the last 3 companies that we spoke to in the spatial audio space, right?
Right.
We want to understand the team's background and kind of why it's relevant to the business that they are building. And then I always look at just type of traction, right? And sometimes that's really difficult to tell from just an email or a deck or a website. Is like, is this product actually real?
Yeah.
Have you produced it? Whether it's software or hardware, or is it an idea? And, if you have produced it, if you started selling it, like including some of those KPIs up front can really attract an investor's interest because it gives some validity, some teeth to what you're actually building.
If somebody wanted to understand like what your current corporate partners investment theses or thesi or theses were, are you posting that somewhere? Are you sharing that kind of like, we're looking for this kind of thing?
We probably could be better at that. There's some general investment themes that are on our website, and they're pretty broad. And I think we do that intentionally because we'd love to hear from any and every company and at least have eyes on it.
Yeah.
But I can give you a teaser of kind of what we're focusing on now. We're doing a ton in the electrification space. We have a couple of vehicle manufacturers that are corporate partners. And so they're very interested in electrification and autonomy. Cool. Battery technology is affiliated with that. E-mobility.
Battery technology is so important right now. That's like the one piece that seems to just not get over the hump.
It's fascinating, and there's some really brilliant people working in this space.
For sure.
Battery tech is always something humbling for me of like, you talk with a scientist in battery technology and they can get deep into it, but it's really fascinating, really exciting, the developments that are going on in that space.
I know there's a lot of that happening regionally with like Argon and folks like that. I know they're doing a lot around battery technology. So hopefully there's some good stuff there to scoop up.
Argon's a great sourcing avenue for us. We're always looking at their technology to see who's commercializing that, who's building businesses out of it. So the earlier stage technology and patents is a fascinating sourcing avenue too.
I can't imagine a more fun job of just like taking a look at all these companies that are doing cool stuff. I mean, that's literally what I'm doing here is like, I like to talk to people, cool people doing cool stuff is kind of the motto. Right. And it's so cool that like, and I even in some of these little niche, strange areas, people doing such creative and innovative things about things you would never think about, but they have the potential for huge impact, So, and looking for that has got to be fun every day.
It is so fun. I mean, my only regret is that you can't invest in all of them, right? You got to pick and choose, and you got to figure out like, all of these brilliant, intelligent, creative people are dedicating their life's work to move some of these technologies forward, and they believe in it so strongly. So it's so fun and so fascinating and really hard to say no to the companies that you ultimately can't invest in.
Their enthusiasm is always very infectious.
Yes.
Based on that, like you've got a lot of, I was surprised at how many companies you have in your portfolio now. You guys have a lot because you haven't been around that long. Because you're kind of a startup yourself. We are.
We've been actively investing since about 2017. Made our first investment in 2017. I'd say like really doubled down and went forward with this path in 2018. So not a ton of time, about 6 total years, but we have about 150 portfolio companies, made about 240 investments, including follow-on investments. So, I feel like every VC says they're one of the most active VCs, but I think if you look at those stats, like we are among the most active. And it's been interesting, even in, macroeconomic conditions like 2023 and 2024, we're kind of able to continue on that clip. We made 32 investments in 2023, where, that was a year where I feel like a lot of VCs kind of had to pull back just based on general
Big
market
time.
conditions.
The flow of money in the VC space has been really up and down over the last 7 years, quite honestly.
It's fascinating because I got into venture about 7 years ago myself personally. So, I'm just used to the flow. It's ebbs and flows constantly. It's like I've never seen kind of a stasis.
Yeah, that'd be boring anyways.
Right. Who wants to do that?
I mean, you got to imagine there's some really cool portfolio companies that you've got. I mean, do you want to highlight maybe a couple of cool companies that you got going that you're excited about?
Let's see. So one of our really fascinating ones is a company called ReSpeecher. We made an investment with them through one of our audio partners. So they're a synthetic audio company that's able to recreate voices for a variety of use cases. So they have a lot of partnerships with studios in Hollywood, movie studios, TV studios to essentially recreate voices for actors, actresses, characters, that are no longer with us. So they did a lot of work with Star Wars for actors that have, passed away. So it's really interesting technology. It's really innovative. And it's definitely a use case that is getting a lot of attention just in terms of like deep fakes and security. So there's a ton of potential there, and they're doing it in a very conscious way of how do you use this kind of in the right way. You know what I mean?
That's a tricky one. I mean, we had a massive strike about that very topic, right? I mean, I can sympathize with the benefits of having something like that. Cause if you have to do reshoots, maybe you can just do them, via AI instead of, spinning the whole production up and trying to get people and, having Henry Cavill, have to get rid of his mustache in post and things like that because he's already on another project where he's committed to having that mustache, So it's like, it's there's a lot to that. And even like doing ADR, I mentioned some of the actors might just want to be out of that, doing that process because I understand it's a very painful process, so it's interesting. What else you got?
Yeah, so let's go totally opposite end of the spectrum. One of our most recent investments is in a company called Haven Energy. So I mentioned a lot of electrification, battery. This is kind of right in that sweet spot. They are a marketplace for electricians to connect with consumers that want battery installations and battery storage in their home. So they are launched in Texas and California. Obviously, geographies that have a lot of power outage issues and a lot of focus on solar, battery tech, storage, VPP. So they've been a really interesting model to kind of how do you generate this at scale, right? Electrification is a very hot trend, both in terms of home electrification and solar, as well as vehicle and automobiles, obviously driven by Tesla, literally driven by Tesla. But they're kind of helping build the infrastructure at a consumer level to support that. So that's been a really fun one to watch. I believe that was our very most recent one.
I drive an electric vehicle. So both battery tech is really key to that because there's just not enough capacity. And like you say, like having that infrastructure in the house, because I want to get to that point where my car is a storage, or even my garage maybe is like an energy storage, node that can power my house in case of an outage, or it can flow both ways, or I can utilize some of the power that I've battery stored to offset, grid times, that are more expensive and things like that. So I love that. That stuff's fun stuff for me.
And I can do one more if you want to hear about another company in a totally different space.
Three's perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Another area that we're looking in is kind of employee engagement and employee training. A lot of our companies, as I mentioned, are industrial, have manufacturing lines, and so are constantly working through how to be more efficient, how to be safer, how to train employees quickly. So another one of our recent investments is a company called Deow. They are based out of Michigan, and they are an employee training solution. So they have kind of like AI-led video production that's able to train employees on a manufacturing line or on like industrial jobs much faster and much more efficiently. you almost always have training like very easily accessible. So that's been a fun one to watch, a fun one to like very quickly implement with some of our corporate partners as well.
That's very cool. I mean, and it sounds like a lot of your investments are kind of a lower lift financially too. It's like because they're specifically targeted and things like that. You can be very successful with them, whereas you don't have to have the one that's like the $1 billion, out the gates, kind of company. You can work with like more realistic companies that have a more realistic valuation, I would argue, so that's got to be nice
crossed.
too.
That's the financial side of our business, right? Like we're investing for the strategic and collaboration, but we also want to make money on these investments, right? Like entry price is really important for us. Market size, growth, exit potential. Those are all things that we look at from a diligence perspective. Because we're not just giving away money for R&D. We're not just investing in this for, access. We are looking to make venture capital returns as well.
Yeah. What's next for TechNexus?
The $1 million question. We're having a lot of brainstorming sessions on that exact question at the team level of how do we kind of continue to build TechNexus. If TechNexus 1.0 was the co-working space, and along the way we've had many different versions of TechNexus, what's the next version? What's TechNexus 4.0? I think that's still up in the air. We've tossed around the idea of raising a more traditional LP fund, whether it be a ton of corporates coming together to invest in a TechNexus ventures, or whether it be family offices, high net worth individuals, institutional investors, giving us a little bit more capital and a little bit more leeway and creativity in types of companies that we've invested in. I think that's potential.
Yeah.
We're doing a ton of deal flow. So I think there's also an opportunity for syndication. Others that want to get involved in our deal flow, building almost like a network that can kind of get tapped into that deal flow and do follow-ons to our portfolio companies. So that's big. And then I think we're going to continue doubling down on our core investment thesis. There's a lot of corporates that should be investing in early stage companies, and that will continue to support their growth. So having conversations with those corporates, with institutions that, could benefit from a venture capital investment thesis and could benefit from partnering with TechNexus is definitely a decent part of how I spend my time and kind of brainstorming who those corporates are, how to get in touch with them, and how to really kind of, get the internal buy-in to move forward with this.
Yeah, I like the idea of like, expanding on like your funds maybe, because, like you said, you're seeing all these companies you want to invest in, but you can't because they don't have alignment with the corporate partners, but, they may have market alignment or, those things. And so you're kind of missing out on that aspect of it since you're seeing so much.
Those are the ones that kill me, is that they're not totally irrelevant, but they're not an exact fit with the investment thesis, right? Like those tangential companies where I can see the benefit, but they're not close enough to truly make the investment. So that's what I'm pushing for internally, is almost like those tangential companies. Like I said, we do a ton of mobility and electrification, but there's some electrification companies that like don't quite fit the thesis. So could we build a thematic investment vehicle that can kind of get a lot of those catch-alls? And the hope is that, as you mentioned, we're already doing that work. We're finding those companies. We're getting the hardest part of the job done. And we have a great expertise in this space because of our knowledge, because of the diligence we've done, and because of the corporate partners that are at our disposal.
That's super exciting. I'm really excited to see where you go. And I'm, like I said, we were talking before, I'm going to, reach out to you about some of the companies you have in your portfolio, because some of them look really interesting. I'd love to interview some of those folks. So I'll be in touch.
That'd be great.
I'll be in touch about that. I want to just say, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you sharing the whole Chicago VC scene. And your very unique model, which I think is cool. You don't really see this kind of flavor of VC typically. So thanks so much for sharing it with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. And for anybody that's listening, would love to connect, would love to follow up. If you're interested in learning more about TechNexus, check us out on Twitter at TechNexus, or on LinkedIn by following TechNexus Venture Collaborative. And I'm Kaitlyn Doyle on LinkedIn as well, if anybody wants to connect and follow up.
Yeah, she's brave. She's brave. So
We'll see.
reach out to Kaitlyn. Reach out to Kaitlyn if you got a great company or if you've got a big corporation that needs a great company. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you could, give us a like, subscribe, share the link with a friend. Be social. And I will see you in the next one.